Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the third day of the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center's 14th annual Fit for a King Summit, which is an annual tribute to the work and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. My name is Kashana Hill, and I serve as Executive Director of the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. I'm so excited to welcome you here today. This is our third and final day of the summit, and we are so excited about the conversations that we have planned. Before we begin today's program, I'd like to first introduce our interpretation team, who will explain how Spanish interpretation will work for today's sessions.
Hola a todos, mi nombre es Chloe y mi pronombre es ella. Estoy aquí el día de hoy con mi cointérprete Judith. Sus pronombres son ella y ella. Somos miembros del colectivo de justicia de lenguaje Bancha Lenguas. Hi everyone, my name is Chloe and my pronouns are she, her. I'm here with my co-interpreter Judith, whose pronouns are she, they. We are members of the Bancha Lenguas Language Justice Collective. Hoy proveeremos interpretación simultánea entre el inglés y el español. Podrá acceder a interpretación después de estas instrucciones. Today, we'll be providing simultaneous English-Spanish interpretation, and you'll be able to access interpretation after these instructions. If you're using a computer, click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen with the word interpretation. Select the channel with the language of your choice, English or Spanish. Si está usando una computadora, haz clic en el icono de globo al pie de su pantalla con la palabra interpretación. Selecciona el canal de su lenguaje preferido, inglés o español. For smartphone or tablet, click on the three dots labeled More to make your selection. Para teléfono inteligente o tableta, haz clic en los tres puntos etiquetados Más para hacer su selección. No se olvide de escoger su canal de lenguaje preferido. Si tiene cualquier problema escuchándonos a nosotros o con la tecnología, por favor envíe un mensaje al chat. Asimismo, es posible que mandemos nosotros un mensaje al chat si es necesario que un orador hable más lento o más alto. Gracias por su compromiso en crear un espacio multilingüe. Don't forget to click on your language of choice. If you have any problem hearing us or with the technology, please send a message in the chat. Likewise, we may send a message in the chat if we need a speaker to slow down or speak up. Thank you so much for your commitment to creating a multilingual space.
Good morning again to everyone who may just be joining us. I would like to take a moment to again introduce myself. My name is Kashana Hill, and I serve as Executive Director of the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. I would also like to, as we've done throughout this summit, acknowledge that anytime we talk about housing, we are also talking about land. New Orleans was once known as Bobancha, a place of many tongues, and was home to the Chitimacha, Atakapa Ishak, Homa, and Choctaw tribes, among many others whose names and languages we no longer know. Our summit this year has discussed how discrimination and displacement can threaten people's very lives, and we cannot have these conversations without acknowledging the genocidal displacement that Indigenous communities have been subjected to for generations on this land. We also cannot have these conversations without acknowledging that Black Africans were stolen from their homeland, enslaved, and forced to work this land, of which they were later dispossessed. Moreover, we recognize that displacement is ongoing and that Indigenous communities, Black communities, and communities of color today face housing injustice in urban and rural communities across the country, as well as land loss due to climate change. The past year has been incredibly challenging and painful in so many ways. Despite all of this, our communities have continued to stand strong to protect each other, to provide mutual aid, and to keep fighting for justice. We are inspired by them, and we have been honored to highlight their work throughout our summit this year. Fit for a King 2021 has been a three-day conversation. During our first week, our speakers discussed environmental racism. Our second session explored the connections between gentrification and policing. Recordings of both days and the full agenda and program are available at fitforaking.org. If you missed any of the conversations, please do check out the recordings. Today, for the final day of our summit, speakers will discuss the eviction crisis and how you can take action to keep our neighbors safe and in their homes. We will begin the day with a conversation with our morning keynote speaker, Carol Fife, a founding member of Moms for Housing and council member for Oakland, California's District 3. We will then present our Mondale Brook Awards for Fair Housing Leadership and Civic Participation. After that, we are so honored to have Congresswoman Maxine Waters join us to present our afternoon keynote. We will then screen an original performance piece by the incredible Dance for Social Change Teen Company. Finally, we'll close the event with a panel discussion where you will hear how organizers and communities are responding to the current eviction crisis and how we can not only use this moment to respond, but also to push for fundamental changes in our housing system. Again, you can see the full agenda and recordings of all sessions at fitforaking.org, and that link will be shared in the chat for everyone to access. I'd like to now shift to a few housekeeping items. I want to ask that you please make sure to fill out your evaluations today. We carefully review feedback and use your comments to improve this event each year. We will share a link to the evaluation at the end of the day. If you have to log out before the end of the program, you will see the evaluation pop up immediately when you log out. If you have any questions for our speakers throughout the day, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you have any technical questions about Zoom or about LAFAC's work, you can reach us by email at info@lafairhousing.org, or you can chat LAFAC staff in the chat box. Now, as we get started and transition to our day, I would like to share just a little bit about the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center for those who are new to our work. Our mission is to eradicate housing discrimination throughout the state of Louisiana. We know that housing discrimination leads to segregation and that neighborhoods and communities are not treated fairly. Housing discrimination has to end if this nation is ever going to achieve racial and economic justice. We work to end housing discrimination in several ways, and you can read more about our work at lafairhousing.org. A link to our website will also be shared in the chat. Louisiana Fair Housing is a statewide agency that works in tandem with partner organizations and community members, and we could not do this work without you. Thank you. Finally, I want to say that this year has shown us how important it is to be agile and to be able to shift our work as needed depending on the immediate needs in our community. Your support makes that ability possible. We're asking people in our network to consider signing up as a recurring donor in any amount today. Sign up to donate at lafairhousing.org/donate. Now, we are excited for our conversation with our morning keynote speaker, Carol Fife. Good morning, everyone. We will now move into a conversation with Carol Fife. I am so excited to have her joining the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center for today's last installment of Fit for a King 2021. So by way of introduction, Carol Fife is an executive director, a community leader, a mother, and a fearless freedom fighter. As director of ACE Oakland, she helped found Moms for Housing and pass legislation at the state and local level to build collective power for tenants. She has fought back against police terrorism and helped to build a network of Black organizations and individuals working together for community self-determination. She has been involved in Oakland electoral politics for over a decade. She is an elected member of the Oakland NAACP's Executive Committee and serves as the housing chair of the organization. Since 2014, she has managed several campaigns, including Oakland's first ever slate of all Black women candidates for City Council and the OUSD Board. She was a 2016 and 2020 Platform Committee delegate for Senator Bernie Sanders and drafted an amendment for the 2020 Democratic National Convention platform to make housing a human right. Carol's legislative and electoral accomplishments include the grassroots organizing energy behind Oakland's Department of Race and Equity, pushing for the Cannabis Equity Permit Program, protecting the Coliseum area from gentrification, passing Oakland's emergency eviction moratoria and pandemic eviction ban, and most recently, pressuring the city council to reopen the city budget in order to divest from Oakland's police department to invest in community services. Carol facilitates many grassroots coalitions, mentors, youth organizations, and candidates running for elected office, and is a trusted advocate and servant of marginalized people everywhere. In November 2020, Carol was elected to Oakland City Council, representing District 3. Carol, thank you so much for joining us today. We're honored to have you.
Thank you for having me. This is amazing.
So we'll just go ahead and jump right into the questions. We just have so much that I know that our community is really excited to hear from you about. And I wanted to start off by asking you to share with us sort of the roots of the Moms for Housing campaign, how that work came to be. And if you could just share with us more about Moms for Housing, I would very much appreciate that.
Sure. I have been the director of ACE Oakland since June of 2017. And it was very interesting. On my very first day, I broke up a very intense fight between a sex worker and someone who hadn't paid her. I was just walking in the door and getting a walkthrough when two people slammed up against my glass door. And I went outside against all of the staff's suggestion because this woman had it wasn't a knife, but it was a screwdriver, holding it on a man saying, "You didn't pay me." And so, I was like, "Sis, you can't do this here." It was a Black woman, and she had to maybe be in her late 40s. And I said, how much does he owe you? And she said $15. So I gave her $40. And she broke down and she said, "This is the only way that I can make money. I'm living in my car with my daughter and I don't have any other options." And that was my very first day at work. And in that course of work, there's another Black woman who would come to my office on a regular basis. She was an elder. She was much older, frail, maybe 4'11". And she'd been living on the streets for quite some time, and she would come in to microwave food or get bus fare for me or just different things. And she was always like, "If you find a permanent place to stay, let me know. I'm trying to get in one of these tough sheds that the city offers." And so I was constantly searching, and there was always a wait list. And then two of my staff, my receptionist and one of the organizers, also fell into a situation. They were like, one was living in hotels, constantly being propositioned by people around the hotel that were living or engaged in the underground economy that were hanging around the hotel, trying to put her on the street. And so she's walking into her hotel room with a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old, and it was just beginning to be too much for her. And she asked me for support. And it just became this thing over and over again where I'm seeing, and they're all Black women coming and saying, "Carol, I need something. I'm losing my mental stability," or "I don't know how much longer I can hang on." But it was when the elder sister, I found out that she attempted suicide, that I was like, "This is too much." And so I called the different women who I had, contact information for. And I said, "I don't have any money. I'm low income. I don't have any property. I don't have networks of people with property for you. But if you organize, then we can get something for you. We're gonna make a lot of noise about the fact that there's no place for these women to stay, for all of you. And so we decided to organize. So I pulled my networks. I said, I'm gonna do everything in my power as an organizer, what I've been taught to do, what I've been trained in, and we're gonna figure something out. And we decided that it was important to make a lot of noise about the conditions.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I know that so many folks in our community and the people who are joining us are very familiar with the Moms for Housing campaign and are thankful for your work and for your example. And I'm just wondering if we can back up a little bit and maybe talk a little bit about how we got to this place, right? Where folks, where Black women in particular, are dealing with being unhoused and don't have access to the safe spaces that they need. And so, to that end, I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit more about the historic roots of the current housing crisis, gentrification and displacement, and its disproportionate impacts on Black communities, right? Because we know that folks not having access to housing doesn't just happen accidentally. It does not just happen in a vacuum. And so I'm wondering if you could just share with us a little bit more about the historic roots and path that got us to this place that we're in now.
Right. And in broad strokes, it's just, this is not a new phenomenon in reality. We were brought to this country from across oceans to be chattel and property. And post emancipation, there's been a long journey of disenfranchising Black families. And I think the most relevant point is that there were successes after emancipation, after Black folks were freed. But then you start to see the criminalization of Blackness. And so criminalization means that you might have been freed, but if you are loitering and you are unemployed, or if you are if you have debt, or there's all these different ways where families were broken up. And it's primarily men that were targeted to work in chain gangs and to be incarcerated, to put them back into a system of chattel slavery where their labor is free. So it ended up with Black women often being the heads of households in many of our family structures and institutions, where now it's just a woman that's providing for the family, and which is a host of economic problems. And so then during the Great Migration, where you see a huge shift in Black families from the South to industrialized areas in the North and East Coast and the West Coast, there were no places where Black people could live because of segregation. And not just housing segregation, but also employment segregation, where Black people didn't have access to living wage jobs that would afford rents. And if they did, rents or mortgages. And if they did, then you had institutionalized racism through redlining and, only allowing Black people to live or get mortgages in certain places. So that relegated us to certain areas, low income areas, that really created communities of poverty. And so we have a combination of economic disenfranchisement and housing disenfranchisement, which creates the conditions that we see today. So it was this historic, very planned way of keeping Black folks away from income earning and living in places with decent schools and housing accommodations. And then fast forward to the financial crisis, because even in spite of that, Black people have been able to thrive and build. But the 2008 financial crisis, where we were targeted with subprime mortgages, wiped out almost all of the gains that were made over 50 years of struggling against all odds in this country. So we have a series of I don't want to say unfortunate events, because really it has been planned to be exactly what it is. And if something continues to happen in the same way across the country, across the world really, then it is not an accident. We can point to the same patterns happening in Louisiana that we can point to in California, in Chicago that we can point to in Philadelphia. And especially, it's been especially harsh in places where you see energy in terms of Black power and Black resistance. So places like Oakland and Detroit and Chicago, Philadelphia, because I was just talking with someone yesterday about the just the mass extermination in Philadelphia for the Move family. So this militarized approach and attack that happened with moms is also not new. So I go through this whole history from the time that we were property to the time that we're taking back property, because I think it's important to highlight and bookmark very key points in our history, because there's never been a time where we've had an opportunity to just fully thrive equally. When after the New Deal, that when Franklin Roosevelt gave all of these subsidies to individuals experiencing the trauma of the Great Depression, once again, Black folks were left out of that equation, and loans were given to white families, and we just had to figure out how to make it. And there's never been a time in this country where we've had the opportunity and the equity to just pull ourselves up. That's the thing we heard a lot, like just work harder or move if you can't afford Oakland. But the reality is, there is no place in the United States of America where you can earn minimum wage and pay the average rents. There's no city in America, so there's nowhere you can go. And when you've been deprived of education and access to employment, it's a perfect storm. So I hope that answers your question in broad strokes, but it's been an uphill battle for us since day one, and it continues to be. And unfortunately, with the end of certain eviction moratoria around the country, I'm concerned, and we're going to need a mass movement to address what's right in front of us.
Well, so that is actually an excellent segue, because I wanted to next sort of talk with you about how we see COVID-19 sort of building upon, right, this legacy of oppression and marginalization that in particular Black folks across the country have experienced. You took us through, right, sort of that very terrible history very quickly, and you mentioned sort of the system of enslavement and Jim Crow and legal discrimination, redlining, the 2008 foreclosure crisis, militarized policing of our communities, the occupation of our neighborhoods by these militarized police forces. And so now, on top of all of that history and on top of all those layers, as we hear a police siren going past my house right now, I wanted to just ask you about how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting, right, this system and the housing crisis that Black folks have been experiencing for many years. And I also not only wanted to ask you about how the COVID-19 pandemic impacts the way we live, but also what can communities do to respond to the time that we're in now?
I think that's an amazing question. And I've been up at night thinking about, how do we get through this? These are very challenging times where people are losing their employment if they had it in the first place. They don't have access to health care. I've been hearing for over a year now. Has it been a year since I don't even know what time we're in right now, but I've been hearing that COVID has laid bare the reality that our safety net is broken. And I would argue that our safety net never existed for so many people in this country. We have been, as African Americans, the guinea pigs of the healthcare industry, or just completely disregarded, where our pain doesn't matter. I mean, I think we all know the story of Henrietta Lacks, where her cells were tested, and how we've been the lab rats, like in the Tuskegee Institute for the medical industry, when they want to test things, or They feel that we're stronger. And Black women have been the crash test dummies for the medical industry since the inception of the medical industry in this country, through testing of not using painkillers for childbirth and just so many things. So COVID-19, because we are at the bottom of every negative indicator that exists, from shorter lifespans and more health challenges, living in environments that are heavily polluted. This was just another attack on our health systems, our personal lives, because the spikes in death and acts, just people acquiring COVID was through the roof very early on, which is why some friends in Oakland pushed for a Black New Deal, because there was no relief for us. We had to physically go to our governments and to say, what are you going to do about the huge numbers of COVID acquisition and death in the Black community? And once again, it was not just Oakland, it was happening all over the country, where we're seeing Black people being hit the hardest from this disease. And one of the things I said that's been keeping me up at night is, how do we deal with this? And I think capitalism and the way that we practice it in this country, that makes us competitive and makes us individuals that only care or primarily care about our own existence, is what drives everything that we do, even unintentionally. We have become products that are, and we control our own lives as a proprietary thing. And I think the only thing that we can do to combat that is work together, is collectivism. We need to figure out, how are we feeding each other? How are we going to make sure that the senior down the street has access to healthy food? And do we even know she's eating? Who's checking in on her? If we're going to have different activities in our community, then how do we do it collectively? How do we look out for our collective well-being? What kind of collective housing can we create? Should we look into co-ops or land trusts? We've got to figure out how we create our own systems apart from the systems that exist. Collectivism is the only way to combat individualism. And I think that's what we need to do, to figure out, how do we pool our money? How do we pool our resources? In every way, we have to think collectively. And so I think that is real true in housing and in every other way as well.
So I'd love to ask you then about sort of that paradigm shift. And I think you're absolutely right. We know that sort of one of the central tenets of what we think of as an American identity is this idea of rugged individualism, right? And so there are all these things that sort of make up what we think of as an American identity, but certainly this idea that one person can, self-determine their future and be in charge of their future, and they just have to work harder than other folks. That is a very, very, very central idea to what we think of when we think about being American. And I think, many folks would argue that kind of hyper singular focus on individualism has actually been detrimental, right, to the people who don't benefit from our power structure. And so if we think about this idea of caring for the general welfare, I wanted to talk to you then about defunding the police. So we know that as we start to think about new ways to exist in the United States, many communities have been calling for divesting from policing in order to shift resources to the social safety net, which, as you pointed out, has never really existed for certain groups of people, right? And so I'm wondering, how can we also then start shifting resources away from evictions and into supporting people being able to remain in their homes?
I firmly believe that if you take something away, that you have got to make sure that there's a system to address the void, because something will come in and fill the void. And I also believe that under racialized capitalism, Black folks and people of color and poor people, poor white people, will always be made the target of a system, because you have to, in this system of capitalism, you have to have something that is, there's an exchange, right? There's there's a financial exchange in capitalism. So there's no real incentive to end crime because it fuels so many other industries. As we know, the prison industrial complex is full of millions of people, and there are more Black people that are incarcerated than there were in chattel slavery. And that is because there's still a desire in this insatiable system to fund and fuel things with free labor. And in the prison system, it's not necessarily free labor. It is, incarcerated people might make $1 an hour or 50 cents an hour. So it's still a system that's using our bodies to feed itself. And so the reality is why would our system, why would our governments, why would corporations really want to invest in completely getting rid of crime, their blue collar crime, like crimes of poverty, because we haven't even scratched the surface on the crimes that are stealing entire neighborhoods through gentrification and speculation. Those are the crimes that I care about. I mean, I also care about the crimes of poverty where people are stealing in order to eat, or even to create a lifestyle that it is on par with this capitalist identity of having things, right? Of being able to floss and flex. But the reality is divestment in order to invest in communities, which I think is essential, especially in Oakland, where our police budget is more than our parks and libraries, parks and rec, human services, Department of Race and Equity, more than at least 6 departments combined, and the departments that actually are serving people, serving our residents. So in situations like that, you have to look at how is it keeping us safer? If crime is up and there are fluctuations in crime that especially are ticking up, then we have to look at what value are we getting for our money. And I don't understand it. Right now, they say that there's a gang war in the district that I live in, and there are no officers because people are upset that there's been this call to defund the police. So there's also an unofficial strike that appears to be happening by the police to punish people for saying that their budgets need to be reallocated. There's no other department in my city that goes over budget at least $30 million and still gets a raise the next year. I don't know what job that you all know about that you can not achieve your requirements and still get a raise and still have a job. So there's something, many things that are flawed about our system of policing. But I also understand because this system creates people that are not whole. There's also going to be a need to keep people safe in their own neighborhoods. But once again, that is why we say all violence is state violence, because the state is what creates the disinvestment in our communities that has people in a constant state of dis-ease, right? There's mental trauma, there is economic trauma, there's educational trauma, and that all comes from a disinvestment in our communities. So if we had that proper investment, the dis-ease would start to wane, right? But unless we have, if we don't have that investment, then the conditions will continue to exist. So we have to create a safety for our people who are living in these conditions and who've lived in these conditions for years. So we need crime to not be happening. We need to have these crimes of poverty not happening. But in order to have them cease, then we need to invest so that we end poverty. So it's this thing that needs to happen.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And that really sort of builds on a conversation that we had at last week's Fit for a King discussion, where several of our panelists really were able to discuss the links between gentrification and policing. And we did have a pretty in-depth conversation about sort of this idea around crime in the first place, right? Who were the folks that decided which actions would be criminalized, and how did those decisions start at a place that was looking to marginalize and oppress people of color, right? And so I think you're absolutely right that that is a very important conversation to have, and it's important to bring sort of those nuances to the discussion for sure. I want to end by maybe combining two questions. So at the very end, I certainly want to bring things back to where we started, which was talking about Moms for Housing's work. And so what I'd like to do is ask this. I would love for you to share your thoughts on how policymakers, advocates, and organizers can support the leadership of those who are most impacted by housing injustice, especially those living at multiple intersections, such as Black housed mothers. And then to wrap it up, I'd love to ask if you can just share which lessons you think other tenant movements should take away from the Moms for Housing's work in Oakland.
Those are really great questions. I think when you are living at the space of multiple intersections, then supports really matter. And what I saw was through this process is that moms need childcare, moms need healthcare, and moms need meals. It's difficult when you're in all of these spaces and trying to lead work that's so transformative. I know there are several days that I didn't eat, so I forgot, and if people hadn't brought me food, I'd been like, oh, I don't think I was going to eat today. So these just really basic support systems, I think, are necessary. And that's why we are trying to create co-ops to support mothers in that way. So when we finish the construction and rehabilitation of Mom's House, it will be a transitional home for unsheltered women and a resource center where we can offer these services to the moms. And so we're working on building out co-ops to provide childcare for people, because as we know, Black women and Latina women have been hit hardest by COVID in terms of employment. So we're trying to look at ways where we can create co-ops where people are creating new ways of generating income for themselves and their communities, and looking through those service employment positions that we may have lost. Everybody still needs childcare. Everybody still needs fresh and healthy food. And if we work directly with farmers in our area, if we work directly with other women and center their leadership and their experiences, then what we need will create right here in our own city. So I think those are some of the things, like find out, ask them what they need. There was still rental assistance that was needed by some of the mothers who were not unsheltered, but living in substandard situations where we were fighting their landlords. And so we were trying to keep them from being evicted while other mothers were in situations where they were in and living in their cars. So there were a bunch of situations that some of our original members were fighting with. And so ask the women in your communities what they need so that they can be on the front lines demanding that we transform the system. And then we're not even just demanding, because there are things that we can do ourselves. And your second question, I believe, was around just the specifics around moms and other places and organizing. How do we support organizing?
Yes, lessons that we can take away in other communities from the organizing and from the work that Moms for Housing has done and is doing in Oakland.
Research. Do your homework. Find out what the conditions are in your particular geography. There are different tools that you should definitely use as an organizer. a way to communicate with the masses, to do mass turnout if necessary, ways to contact the media. You have to constantly be checking in with each other and meeting regularly to be able to frame your story, because the reality is that the real estate industry is a powerful, powerful industry, and they can influence media channels. So you have to have a way to get your message out there without relying on the traditional ways of information dissemination. And we were constantly at work with people that had ins with different networks, because they were going to run with the dominant narrative that these Black women were welfare queens and thieves. And it was because the opposition had a very well-paid PR machine, and the press was picking up his talking points, and they tried it, but they weren't ready for us. Oh my goodness. They were like, that one, get her out of here. They were trying to discredit me, because I was like, oh, so did you get those talking points from Sam Singer, the same public relations firm that fought for the oil companies to dismantle community organizations in the Amazon? The ones who poisoned the rainforest? That guy? Okay. So it's important to have your own media machine and ways to impact the existing ones, I think is important. But research your neighborhoods, research who owns what. It's difficult with LLCs because they have a lot of different owners. They're all over the place, but don't let that stop you. If you need specific tools, you can always check in with us in ACE Oakland. We've been organizing for a long time, but understand that we're against a behemoth, and we have got to, once again, work together. And there are people who've done it before. So use us as a resource. The Community Ready Corps, get your security and your safety team together, and take care of yourself. I think it's really important for organizers to do. It's a lesson that I'm still learning, but self-care is critical. If you can, try to rest, drink a lot of water, find out a spiritual routine. Whatever it is, find time to introspect and rest your mind, because this is not a sprint. Organizing is a marathon. We've been fighting systems for a long time, but we've also been winning. So we got to take our wins and lift those up and celebrate them, because you're going to have a win and then you're going to have to get right back to the fight.
Well, thank you so much, Carol. We will let you get back to the fight, but I did just want to thank you one more time for sharing your wisdom, your expertise, and your time with us. We very much appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much.
It was my honor. Thank you.
Thanks again to Carol Fife for joining us for that amazing conversation. At this time, we will continue with our program. And again, I just want to introduce myself for folks who may have joined us recently. My name is Kashana Hill. I'm Executive Director of the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. And I would now like to introduce Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center's Director of Policy and Communications, Maxwell Chardulo, who will present our Mondale Brook Awards. Maxwell?
Thank you, Kashana. So yes, I'm here to present the Mondale Brook Awards, and this award is named after Senators Walter Mondale and Edward Brooke, who worked diligently to make the Fair Housing Act a reality, and who finally succeeded in 1968, a week after Dr. King's assassination. We present this award each year because though we know change is made by movements, we also know it is greatly assisted by smart and savvy policymakers. And so this award is specifically for policymakers who have distinguished themselves as champions of civil and housing rights. And so our first awardee this year is State Representative Mandy Landry, whose district includes a number of uptown neighborhoods in New Orleans. Mandy grew up in a working class home in New Orleans and is the first person in her family to graduate from college. She then spent time in Washington, D.C., where she worked for a U.S. congressman and a senator, and as a policy assistant for Amnesty International. As an attorney in Louisiana, she's represented one of the last 3 remaining abortion clinics in the state, and has always strived to use her legal knowledge and expertise for justice. The particular efforts that we want to lift up and honor her for today is her willingness to take on tough issues at the state legislature and fight for renter protections in a state with some of the worst landlord-tenant law in the country. I usually have to track down representatives, but Representative Landry actually sought me out after her election to figure out how she could help address some of the housing issues she saw in her own district. She was constantly reading articles, asking questions, and prodding me about ideas about legislation. We were regular text buddies in short order. And about a year ago, in the before times, she agreed to carry a bill to bring our eviction laws up to the same standard as our neighbors in Texas and Mississippi. And yes, even Texas and Mississippi have better landlord-tenant laws than we do. COVID pushed pause on that bill, but when the legislature came back in May, she was willing to get creative and pivot and amend the bill to try and ensure that renters would have more time to pay down their back rent that they incurred during the pandemic. And though the bill failed, she was a skillful champion who has significantly elevated this issue and made it more likely that we will have future wins, including her participation in a hearing just yesterday. And so, Representative Landry, thank you from all of us, and please accept this award, which I was able to give to you yesterday.
Hi, everyone. Yep, here's my award from yesterday. Nice to see you all. Nice to see you again, Maxwell. I was really touched by this, and this is a true story of how I got to housing issues about 2 years before I even thought about running for office. One of my neighbors had problems with a home that was sold quickly, and their rent went up $700 a month. I will never forget it. She had 5 children, and I started researching Louisiana's laws because I'm like, of course, this must be wrong or illegal, and I was floored that something like that could happen and happen regularly. And I was excited when I won to see that there are a lot of advocates out there who are working on these issues. It's going to be such a tough road, as we saw this year, getting even basic protections. But if there's one thing I want to do before I leave the legislature, is to at least have minimal protections, legal protections for tenants in Louisiana. I think we are at the floor, and we need to at least, lower than the floor. We need to at least get to the floor around the country. And if there's one thing I want to do, it's that y'all are a great community. You have so many resources and so many people who truly want to help the people in our state. And I hope we can do more this year. I hope that we can actually use that federal money and put it to very good use and smart use. And I'm always here for the fight. I'm always here for educating. And I think that's important that we keep doing when we keep doing this work, that we know what we're doing is educating people and alerting to them to what's going on, like yesterday. So I'm glad to know you. I will continue to text you and pester you with questions, and you and the rest of the community are such a good resource for us, and I appreciate you.
Thank you, Maddie. And yes, please do continue pestering us. We look forward to working together some more.
Yeah, I really like this. My mom said thank you too.
That's great. Our second awardee is State Representative Ted James of Baton Rouge. Representative James was also recently chosen by his colleagues to serve as the next chair of the Legislative Black Caucus. And he is a Baton Rouge native who began his political work fighting for affordable housing under Governor Blanco. As the governor's policy advisor on housing and community development, Ted assisted in securing $25 million investment into the Louisiana Housing Trust Fund. And since his election to the legislature in 2011, he's been recognized as a champion for criminal justice reform and now serves as the chair of the Administration of Criminal Justice Committee. You might also know him from a video that went viral this summer of his impassioned speech on the House floor, defending his resolution calling for a review of law enforcement procedures after the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. Like Mandy, Ted sought me out this year with a number of ideas to expand protections for renters who have faced eviction during the pandemic and will now be saddled with a mark on their credit history that will follow them for years and potentially bar them from jobs and homes. He navigated 2 bills through hearings full of his anti-masking colleagues this October. And though neither passed, he kept this issue alive through a resolution that resulted in a very successful hearing yesterday. And I think that will really set us up to propose some new protections this spring. So Representative James, we thank you for your commitment to housing justice, and please accept our award.
Thank you, Maxwell. I have my award as well. I've been riding around with it. Ironically, I am parked outside of Louisiana Housing Corporation, following up on some discussions that we had yesterday. So thank you all, Maxwell, Kashana, who's been my good friend for a long time. You know, legislators, we get a lot of credit because our names appear on bills, but you guys that are on the ground doing this work every single day, you are the real champions. Thank you for allowing us to work with you. These issues are so critically important. And Maxwell, even, you know, on yesterday, it kind of made me shift some focus and move one of my bills, because I was to the limit. But I know that this issue is one that I don't want to abandon. And so for me, I'm freeing up space to continue on this fight. I think that the hearing we had yesterday, from the testimony and the research and the information was so vitally important. So I look forward to working with you all to continue to make sure that we're protecting renters and making sure that these folks are protected from, you know, securing housing way past this pandemic. You mentioned the folks that didn't have masks, like, you know, that's a whole nother discussion. But again, you know, thank you guys. You know, I'm gonna put this up on the wall, and I look forward to working with you guys, and hopefully I'll be able to frame a bill right next to it once we get some things passed in the legislature. So thank you, and let's keep up the work.
Thank you, Ted. We really appreciate that, and we really look forward to working with you as well in the next session. And so thanks to all of our colleagues at the legislature who support housing rights. As we said, we build movements, and that's how we actually get things done. But we also very much value and rely on the partnership we have with some of our lawmakers who really understand how important this is.
Thank you, Maxwell. Also, just want to add my thanks and congratulations to the recipients of this year's Mondale Brook Awards, Representatives Mandy Landry and Ted James. The work that you do is so very important. We are so thankful to for your commitment to housing justice. It can certainly be an uphill fight in the Louisiana legislature, as we know, but the two of you continue to do the right thing, even when many of your colleagues are opposed. And so we thank you for your courage and for your commitment. And we look forward to continuing to fight with you. I know that many of you are excited for who is coming up next, and that is Representative Maxine Waters. While we wait for her to join us, I do want to ask that folks go ahead and start thinking about questions that you'd like to ask Representative Waters as she discusses the eviction crisis and the state of housing today. You can also make sure to follow us on social media platforms if you haven't already done so, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please also keep an eye out for our action alerts so that you can get involved in the work that we do. If you have not already visited our website at lafairhousing.org, please make sure to do that and get signed up for our email list so that you can receive those action alerts. You can also sign up to donate on a recurring basis, and we would love to have your ongoing support. I did just want to note that we do have lots of messages of congratulations and thanks in the chat for both Representative Landry and Representative James. Again, the community is very appreciative of the work that you have done and that you continue to do. So what we are going to do is just take a very, very, very short break. We are running just a couple of minutes ahead of schedule, which we're very excited about, but did not necessarily anticipate. So feel free to just kind of take a moment and do whatever you need, but we will be coming right back to you with Representative Maxine Waters. Thank you. Hello again, everyone. This is Kashana Hill, Executive Director of the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. And I think that may have been a shorter break than maybe some of you were anticipating, but it looks like we do have the Congresswoman joining us. And so definitely would like to go ahead and move into that introduction, because we know how very, very, very busy Congresswoman Waters is.
If you can give us 2 minutes.
Absolutely, we can do that. And so in the meantime, I will just, again, encourage everyone to please visit our website, lafairhousing.org, sign up for our action alerts if you haven't already done so, sign up to be a recurring donor if you haven't already done that. Also, again, want to encourage you to follow us across social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, as well as on Instagram. And you can find lots of information about the work that we are doing, about our policy priorities on our website, as well as on all of those social media channels. I do also want to note that we are always looking for testers to work with us. Many of you are familiar with our testing program, where we train community members and send them out into the housing market to help us determine whether and how housing discrimination is occurring in our communities across the state. If that is something that you're interested in, you can absolutely sign up to be a tester at our website, lafairhousing.org. We can never have too many folks who are interested in joining the fight for housing justice in this way, and we would absolutely love to have you work with us if that's something that you're interested in. Again, you can find more information about the organization and about testing opportunities at lafairhousing.org. Or if you're interested in becoming a tester, you can give us a call at 504-717-4257. If you know anyone who has experienced housing discrimination and would like to speak with someone about that, they can call us at 504-596-2100. And with that, I will go ahead and begin the introduction of our esteemed afternoon keynote speaker. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Kashana Hill. I'm Executive Director of the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center, and I am honored to introduce to you today Representative Maxine Waters. Congresswoman Waters is considered by many to be one of the most powerful women in American politics today. She has gained a reputation as a fearless and outspoken advocate for women, children, people of color, and the poor. Congresswoman Waters was elected in November 2018 to her 15th term in the U.S. House of Representatives with more than 70% of the vote in the 43rd Congressional District of California. After the 2018 midterm elections, Congresswoman Waters made history as the first woman and the first African-American chair of the influential House Financial Services Committee, which oversees all components of the nation's housing and financial services sectors, including banking, insurance, real estate, public and assisted housing, and securities. In this role, Representative Waters stayed true to form and worked tirelessly to hold the previous administration accountable for the way its policies and inaction perpetuated harm on communities of color and other groups. Representative Waters is also a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and member and past chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. Throughout her more than 40 years of public service, Congresswoman Waters has been on the cutting edge, tackling difficult and often controversial issues. She has combined her strong legislative and public policy record and high visibility in Democratic Party activities with a deep commitment to grassroots organizing. Those of us in New Orleans appreciate that Representative Waters has always been a friend to this community and that she worked diligently after Hurricane Katrina to ensure a right to return and one-for-one replacement of public housing units. I am so honored to bring to you all today Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Congresswoman? Oh, I think we've still got you on mute. Oh, you were off mute and then you went back on.
There.
There you go.
That should do it. Gotcha? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me thank you for that very generous introduction. I'm so pleased to be with you this morning. And I'm very pleased to join the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center for this year's virtual Fit for a King event. And thanks to you, Kashana Hill, for both that introduction and for your great leadership to ensure fair housing throughout the state of Louisiana. The work of the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center and fair housing organizations across the country is now more important than ever as we work to address housing disparities during the COVID-19 pandemic, and as we began to rebuild from the damage that was caused by the last administration. At the onset of the pandemic, we saw reports of housing-related sexual harassment increase by 300%. In some communities, and Asian American and immigrant communities have faced increased incidents of housing-related hate crimes. So as chairwoman of the Financial Services Committee, I fought to secure $12.4 billion in critical housing funds in the CARES Act for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, including funding for fair housing programs. I also fought to secure eviction and foreclosure protections and forbearance relief for homeowners with federally backed mortgages. Time and time again, we have seen how in the aftermath of disasters and economic downturns like those of Hurricane Katrina and the 2008 Great Recession, federal relief funding has often been spent in ways that discriminate against people of color and other protected classes of people. I've been working around the clock to ensure that there is an equitable response to COVID-19 pandemic crisis. I, along with my Democratic colleagues on the committee, recognize the importance of bolstering the fair housing infrastructure with funds that are so desperately needed to protect people on the ground. As the coronavirus has continued to spread across the country, many individuals and families, especially in lower income communities and communities of color, are experiencing the most damaging effects to both their health and financial stability. The national death toll is expected to reach 500,000 in the next month, with many still grappling with unemployment and wage loss. Nationally, nearly 20% of renters are unable to pay their rent, while more than 8 million homeowners have reported they are behind on their mortgages. In Louisiana, these numbers are even more troubling, with over a third of all households estimated to be struggling to make housing payments in August. We know that these hardships are not felt evenly across racial lines. As a result of the ongoing legacy of housing discrimination and residential segregation in the United States, we have seen formerly red-lined areas across the country experience disproportionate rates of COVID-19 infections and subsequent deaths, higher rates of mortgage forbearances and debt accumulation, as well as increased eviction pressures. As of June 5th, Black residents in New Orleans Parish accounted for 77% of 492 COVID-19 deaths, despite representing 60% of the parish population. This is compared to a less than 20% death rate for white residents, who make up 35% of the population. In September of 2020, Women of color experience the greatest job losses due to the ongoing economic shock of COVID-19. And we know that prior to the current pandemic, Black and Latinx households, especially women-headed households, were more likely than anybody else to be subject to evictions. In the wake of this current crisis, these are the same households that stand to face the most acute housing instability. Since the onset of the crisis, I've fought for the creation of $100 billion Emergency Rental Assistance Fund to support families and individuals who are facing months of back rent that they're unable to pay through no fault of their own. And so I'm very pleased that in the bipartisan legislative package, we did at least pass into law $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, and we extended the eviction moratorium through the end of January. I applaud organizations like yours for your advocacy in helping us secure these critical funds. But that bill must only be the first step. I'm pleased that President Biden took executive action during this first week in office to extend the eviction moratorium through the end of March and called on federal agencies to extend the foreclosure moratorium for homeowners. As chair of the Financial Services Committee, I'm working hard to ensure that Congress provides more emergency rental assistance funds, along with additional assistance to low and middle income homeowners. In addition to executive actions on COVID-19 related items, I'm very pleased to see President Biden sign an executive moratorium on Thursday calling on the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development to redress our nation's history of discriminatory housing policies and practices. This is a major step in the work we have ahead of us to strengthen our fair housing laws and to reinstate the regulations implementing the Fair Housing Act that were dismantled by the Trump administration, such as the affirmatively furthering fair housing and disparate impact rules. As chairwoman of the Financial Services Committee, I have fought hard to defend fair housing and restore these protections. Over the last 4 years, I, along with members of the committee, have introduced legislation to make housing opportunities fair, more equitable, such as the Restoring Fair Housing Protections eliminated by HUD Act of 2018 and the Housing Fairness Act of 2020, the latter of which passed the Financial Services Committee in early 2020. So I look forward to continuing to push this important work forward in the 117th Congress. And I'd like to thank the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center staff and leadership for your tireless work and for keeping me and my staff up to speed on the challenges you and your communities face during these difficult times. And so I know that you're going to be pleased to know that Marcia Fudge was appointed by the President of the United States of America to be the HUD Secretary, to oversee all of this housing policy and to carry out and support the kind of legislation that we all have been working on for far too long. And so I believe that her confirmation hearing is today, and I feel very confident that she's going to be confirmed by the Senate and that she will be the HUD Secretary. And so many of the issues, again, that we've been working on, we will have a chance to get them passed out of certainly my committee onto the Senate, and where if there is a tie in the Senate, that Kamala Harris will break the tie because she will be the president of the Senate as the vice president of the United States of America. And so I'm feeling very good despite all of the difficulties we've been going through, the invasion on our Capitol and the right wingers, the white supremacists, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, all of these terrorist groups that were in town and still lingering around our country are focused on destroying our democracy and so-called taking back their government. But we're going to move forward with this president and with this vice president and not only correct some of the damage that has been done by Trump, but we're going to move forward with a futuristic agenda, taking a look at all of those areas that have been lacking in support. And I tell you, fair housing is at the top of the agenda. And in the president's initiative, he charged HUD with getting about the business of getting rid of racial disparities and creating equity for all of those that have been left out, and particularly people of color. So I thank you, and I look forward to working with you. And we'll talk sometime about what happened, I think, in St. Bernard Parish some time ago, where they had the relatives who were hooked in to the kind of policy that would protect them in getting the housing that was certainly excluded the people of color from having. So here we are, we're on our way, and thank you so very, very much for having me.
Congresswoman Waters, thank you very much for joining us. We know that you are busy beyond belief. I don't know how much time you have. As you can imagine, we've had several questions come through. I don't know if you're able to answer one or two questions. Is that okay for you? Or?
Yes, that's all right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll pose just a couple to you and then let you go. So we've got two here in the chat box. The first question is, how can everyday people advocate for fair housing, and what actions can we take to address discriminatory housing policies?
Well, first of all, let me thank you again for the advocacy that you have made so helpful to me and my committee in getting public policy that makes good sense for all of the people. But let me say this to your elected officials: make it a priority, keep it on their radar screen, talk about it on radio talk shows, write editorials about it, keep it as an issue that has to be dealt with, and let's not back down from it. You know what happens when we talk about fair housing and talk about getting rid of discrimination? They say, oh, they're playing the race card. Don't let that get in the way of your advocacy. If they say that, just turn a blind eye to it. Don't pay any attention to it. Have a strong voice on advocacy. Make it at the top of your priorities, and that will help an awful lot. The average person can do that. Talk about it. Keep it on the radar screen.
Thank you very much. And just a last quick question from one of our board members who is mentioning, like so many other people, that she is so very excited that you are here and also in awe of everything that you have done. But the question is, what are your thoughts about how jurisdictions can fight through legislation and advocacy the displacement of gentrification, where property values rise rapidly and price out renters who have historically lived in the community?
You know, this is a good question, because gentrification is happening all over the country in various ways. And in my own district, the city of Inglewood has brought in all of these big time sports teams, the Rams and the Chargers, and everybody's coming in. And of course, there are some jobs that are available, particularly at the beginning of construction. But oftentimes these jobs are limited, and they are not jobs that will last, for long periods of time. And so the economic argument is always made for those who are doing the development, who are coming into the communities, and we have to get in front of the development and the construction. Whenever the city councils are giving permission to the developers to come into the community and deal with market rate housing, and they're not at all thinking about low income housing and what's going to happen to the displacement, you have to get involved right then. Don't let the development start. And you get involved the minute it emerges in the city councils, and you say to your city council members what you have to do if you're going to advance any kind of housing, first of all, you've got to make sure that affordable housing is included in the plan. That's number one. And number two, not only is it included in the plan, but that has to start even before your development of your whatever your development project is, or at the same time. We're not going to have you say, well, yes, we'll include it. And so after we get the development up, the year from now, we will be, no. We want it in the plan from the beginning. And if it's not in the plan from the beginning, if you are intent on running over our communities, we're going to run a campaign against you because you are our representative. You are the one that's supposed to look out for us. Our senior citizens don't have increased income to find market rate apartments. They have nowhere to go. And so we have to look out not only for the seniors, but for our low income folks who have been in these communities for years oftentimes, and they only can afford what they can afford. And what happens is if they don't own the place, the owners see all of this development and they know that the communities are becoming more, likable and people want to move in, they're going to raise the rents. And our seniors and our low income families won't have any more rent to be able to go out and find a place someplace else. So you have to get tough. And it lies with the local elected officials, those city council members who give permission to the developers to develop in the communities. Fight them, okay?
Thank you, Congresswoman Waters. That is an absolutely wonderful response and just brings home the importance of the work that we do in this community on the local level as well. So I always appreciate you sort of making sure that folks understand it's not just about the federal government, right? We've got to work at all levels. And I do just want to thank you one more time on behalf of the staff and board of the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center. We are so honored that you chose to share your expertise and your insight with us today. On a personal note, and I know I'm not the only one that feels this way, I absolutely grew up admiring your courage and your fierce commitment to justice. As I've grown older, I have come to know that sometimes using our voice comes with a cost. And I want to thank you for continuing to use your voice, even though it may have been lonely or difficult or even terrifying at times, despite the fear, despite the loneliness or the difficulty. You have shown a commitment to speaking truth to power that has never wavered. And I thank you for that. And I thank you on behalf of all those people that fight alongside you. And for all of us that are coming along after you, you've never let us down, and we will absolutely not let you down. We will continue to learn from your lessons and your example. And we thank you again for being here with us.
Oh my goodness, you are just too generous. You are just too supportive. And the way that you have just articulated that does my heart well. Thank you so much for the confidence that you're showing in me. And I too will never let you down. Thank you.
We know you won't. You never have. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care.
Right.
And I know that you all are just as full and as encouraged as I am by the wisdom and the insight that Congresswoman Waters has shared with us and has continued to share with us for so many years. I hope that we can carry that energy into the next part of our day because I know that it will be just as uplifting. I'd like to now take a moment to introduce Dance for Social Change. Dancing Grounds is a multi-generational arts organization that brings inclusive and accessible dance programs to New Orleans residents of all ages. With youth dance companies, summer camps, and Dance for Social Change, Dancing Grounds creates safe and celebratory spaces in which the lived experiences of youth are truly valued and their unique creative talents are recognized, developed, and celebrated. Dancing Grounds also hosts the most comprehensive adult dance program in the city. Since 2012, Dancing Grounds has become a driving force for arts and education in New Orleans and a hub for the local dance community, serving over 3,000 youth, 5,000 adults, and countless audience members. Dancing Ground's work is guided by a set of core values: equity, racial justice, integrity, relationships, learning, collaboration, abundance, and joy. With that, we hope that you will enjoy this performance by Dance for Social Change. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Shanice Holmes and I am the Team Program Manager for Dancing Grounds. I am so excited to introduce to you Soul Nostalgia, a film created by the Dance for Social Change youth. Now, this film that you're going to see is about gentrification, about the effects of displacement, and how it's so related to what we're still seeing happen today. In the midst of a global pandemic, you'll hear stories from these youth. So I hope you enjoy and be on the lookout for their film coming 2021. You can check out dancinggrounds.org to keep updated.
Welcome. We are here to mourn the death of a city that lingers in its essence. The sweet smells of our grandmother's cooking has begun to produce a stench. The gumbo has blackened and spoiled, and the spy boy has died. Second-line handkerchiefs morph into funeral programs. Tears drip like bees hanging on St. Charles trees. You thought this was a celebration, where you would feast on the sorrows of the displaced. Lick your fingers clean of their winding resilience and wash it all down with the waters that flooded their homes. As you move in, they see their city lowered into the ground. For them, the dirge does not fade. It is everlasting.
Of all the people who have died of COVID-19 in Louisiana, 7 out of 10 are African American.
Discriminatory policies leading to inequitable health outcomes in our patients for centuries.
Let me be crystal clear. We do not think people of color are biologically or genetically predisposed to get COVID-19, but they are socially predisposed to coronavirus exposure and to have a higher incidence of the very diseases that put you at risk for severe complications of coronavirus.
What started out as a natural disaster became a man-made disaster because we came to understand that for too long been plagued by structural inequalities that left too many people, especially poor people, especially people of color, without good jobs or affordable health care or decent housing.
For residents of African American neighborhoods, such as the lower Ninth Ward, it was a symbol of something else: discrimination.
Federal tax dollars spent in the name of recovery that have actually created one of the largest racial disparities that we've had in the history of not just New Orleans, but the Gulf region. And so it's not a situation of figuring out what's the best way to go forward. The problem that we have is that there's tension and conflict in the recovery planning. Predominantly African American indigenous communities bear the brunt of that. We're living on the front lines of both the causes and effect. And because we love the places that we call home in New Orleans and in surrounding areas, we're fighting for changes and we're on the front lines of as well.
Welcome to my home, this place that I call my home. This place, this is my place. More like our place. We were born here, we cherished it here, we love here. This is the city that we want to hold close. This is the city that we love. So hear the jazz, feel the sun. Make the music want to do what you want to do. This is the city that we love. This is the city that we cherish. This is our place. This is my place. We want to hold this city until it's blown away. This is the city I love and will continue to love until I'm in the dirt with it and come back as part of it. This is my place. This is our place. We want to hold on to this city and cherish it. But how can you hold on to something when it's blowing away?
Familiarity. My home is what I know. Such a comforting space. I am safe in this place. And I will not be displaced by invaders. Today they want to change and segregate. But they don't know my soul, my rhythm and flow. They say I am inferior, but really I'm superior. Profiting from our ways, but they could never be the same. You wanna repair, but you displace. And now my community has changed. That star that made me feel at home isn't even there no more. Where has it gone? Tell me, where has it gone? Where is my home? Where is my peace? Where is my soul that lied inside of me? Where has it gone? Tell me, where has it gone?
Displaced,
displace,
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 displace.
displace.
This place is mine.
This place is mine.
This place is mine.
This place is mine.
This place.
This place is mine.
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 Displace.
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 This place is mine.
This place is mine.
Mine. This place is mine.
This place is mine.
Mine.
Mine. This place is mine.
This
place is mine.
This place.
Mine.
This place. This place is mine. This place.
This place.
This
is
place.
mine.
This
place is mine.
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 What a wonderful performance. Want to thank again Dance for Social Change for sharing that excerpt with us. Want to make sure that you all know that what you saw was an excerpt from a piece by Dance for Social Change. You can see the full piece on their website. It was an excerpt from a piece called Solastalgia, and we will share the link to Dance for Social Change's full website in the chat so that everyone can check out the full piece if they would like to do so. With that, I would like to bring back LAFAC's Director of Policy and Communications, Maxwell Ciardulo, to introduce our closing panel. And before we do that, I just want to say that this is a group that we knew could follow Carol Fife and Congresswoman Maxine Waters and all the amazing things that you've seen and heard today. So we're very excited to bring this group of legendary organizers to you all, and we're looking forward to hearing what they have to say to close us out. Maxwell?
Thank you, Kashana. So yes, I'm the Director of Policy and Communications here, and I am very excited today to bring 3 panelists to come share their big brains with you. And our panel today is, Do We Need Evictions? Transformative Housing Justice Organizing in a Pandemic. And your panelists today are Sarah Carthen Watson, who is Associate Counsel in the Fair Housing and Community Development Project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law, where she leads their national anti-eviction project work in the Twin Cities. And before this project, her work was focused on challenging the discriminatory effects of nuisance and crime-free ordinances on people of color, victims of domestic violence, and low-income communities. And she's also worked or volunteered on civil rights and housing justice issues in St. Louis, New York, and the Chicago suburbs. Our second panelist is Tara Raghuveer, who is the founding director of KC Tenants in Kansas City. She's also the Homes Guarantee campaign director at People's Action, which is a national network of grassroots organizations committed to racial, economic, gender, and climate justice. Tara is an Australian-born Indian American immigrant who came to the US with her family in 1995 and grew up in Kansas City. I'll also add that she's been a leader in the movement to cancel rent and mortgages during COVID and knows all the coolest members of Congress. And our last panelist is Frank Southall. Frank is the lead organizer and community engagement coordinator at the Jane Place Neighborhood Sustainability Initiative. At JPNSI, Frank coordinates organizing, outreach, and education strategies to empower New Orleanians to hold slumlords and developers accountable, doing exactly that work that Chairwoman Waters was talking about. Frank is also a member and an architect, really, of the New Orleans Renters' Rights Assembly. He's been involved in racial and housing justice organizing for nearly 20 years and still manages to be one of the most upbeat and positive people that I know. So I'm just going to give a brief overview, and then we're going to get right into this, and I'm going to let our panelists do most of the talking. And we're also going to be doing polls throughout, so be sure to look for those and answer those as they pop up. So the impetus for this panel was, I think, relatively obvious to us and likely to those of you joining us. The pandemic has taken just a devastating toll on millions of families that were already housing insecure before March of 2020. And evictions have always been a housing and public health crisis. And now they've spiraled out of control, with 18 million households saying they have little to no confidence that they'll be able to make next month's rent. And throughout the pandemic, we haven't seen any local or state government or the federal government treat this like the crisis that it is. So, do we need evictions is an intentionally provocative question. And it's one we're asking because for many of us, COVID has created an opportunity to reframe how we think and talk about eviction defense work as life or death racial justice work. So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so discussing how we got here, the solutions we need to keep us all in our homes, and how everyone can take action for justice. And so as we talk, if questions come up, please put those in the Q&A box rather than the chat, and feel free to sort of put them in as they come up throughout. And so we're going to start with a quick audience poll related to our topic here, our title of our panel. Do we need evictions during a pandemic? And so I'm going to start here. Sarah, I'm going to have you kick us off. You came to eviction work through the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing process. And I'll let you explain that a little bit. But can you explain how those things are connected and how landlord-tenant laws are a fair housing issue?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So for those who don't know, the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing requirement is a rule that's embedded within the Fair Housing Act that tells HUD and by extension all people, its grantees, all people who receive funds from HUD, that they have to do more than just prohibit discrimination. They have to take steps to actively eradicate discrimination, to open up housing opportunity for protected classes. And so as part of that process, jurisdictions that receive certain types of HUD funds are required to complete what's essentially a fair housing audit of their jurisdiction, examining barriers to housing for members of protected classes. So that's race, sex, disability, et cetera, and figure out ways that they can take active steps to address those barriers. And so a lot of jurisdictions will contract out to organizations that have more fair housing expertise. And so the Lawyers Committee has been doing a lot of this work over the last couple of years. And as we've been doing those from states to regions to cities at all different scales, one thing that we saw was that landlord-tenant laws were a significant barrier to people of color who are renting, who are tenants. In many places, home ownership is a tool that's reserved almost exclusively for white families and white households. So these renter populations in a lot of places are vastly comprised of communities of color, households of color, and these laws were direct contributors to families of color being excluded from housing or pushed out of housing. So some examples of that include really restrictive criminal background screening policies, allowing source of income discrimination, publishing even dismissed eviction cases on tenants' records permanently so that they were unable to get housing somewhere else because of that eviction on their record, nuisance and crime-free ordinances that are disproportionately impacted against or enforced against communities of color, et cetera. So in addition to telling jurisdictions, oh, you need to build more affordable housing, you need to deepen levels of affordability of the housing that you're building, we saw that a lot of what was affecting fair housing issues for protected classes were these landlord-tenant laws. And we had to kind of make recommendations that addressed the barriers that those laws were creating for communities of color.
Thank you. Tara, I'm going to come to you next, and then Frank. So you're in Kansas City and Frank in New Orleans. How have you seen race as a factor in this eviction crisis where you're at, and how has it shown up in your work?
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful and such an honor to be part of this panel. I've had the opportunity to work with both Sarah and Frank before and can confirm that there are some of the most brilliant organizers, lawyers, thinkers in the country, and it's my deep pleasure to be part of this movement with them. And thank everyone else for having me here. A special shout out to Kashana, who's amazing, and your whole organization. This program is beautiful, and I can't believe you have us following Maxine Waters and Carol Fife, but I will do my best. So the first thing I just want to say in grounding is, like, It's Thursday, and Thursday in Jackson County, Missouri is eviction day. I'm wearing my action outfit right now because we just had a court blockade this morning, and we have another court disruption that's going to start at 1:30 when the afternoon courts reopen. So just want to bring that energy into this space. Like, I'm coming here with an emphatic no, eviction should not be permitted during the pandemic or otherwise. And I'll tell you more about that in a bit. But in terms of the racial impact, I've been studying evictions in Kansas City for almost a decade. And what I know through 200,000 eviction records that are all at the address level in terms of granularity is that for a Black family in Kansas City, you're 18 times more likely to be evicted than a white family who earns the same amount of money on the west side of town. So Kansas City looks very similar to a lot of other mid-sized Midwestern cities, has a similar history of racial segregation and redlining. In a lot of ways, Kansas City was one of the birthplaces of tactics like redlining and racially restrictive covenants. There was an evil developer back in the early part of the 20th century named J.C. Nichols, who invented some of these practices and then spread them like wildfire across the country. And J.C. Nichols is one of the many factors that contributes to this reality today, where on the east side of town, where most of the Black residents of Kansas City live, there is a remarkably higher eviction rate. Of course, in fact, I think many of us on this call know it's not just Black communities and Black people generally who are the most impacted by eviction. It's specifically Black women. And that definitely plays out here in Kansas City as well.
Thank you, Tara. And I think we might have poll results here. And Frank, I'll let you jump in and feel free to respond to that as well, if that's part of what you want to talk about. But it does seem like the majority of us do not believe that we need evictions during a pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. There should be no evictions during this pandemic. But I just want to say thank you for having me. It is a pleasure and honor to be on this panel. And I echo what Tara said about following up with Representative Waters and Carol. Yeah, so, you know, the intersection of race and housing is as old as this country's existence, you know, starting with the dispossession of land of indigenous people. So like, you know, we can't have a conversation about evictions without talking about race. We know in New Orleans that we see that playing heavily out in redlining. We know that to this day that the highest rates of eviction are occurring in neighborhoods that were redlined back in the day. So it's an inescapable fact. Oftentimes, I think people tend to go like, oh, well, where people are being evicted are in middle class and upwardly mobile neighborhoods. And that's just not true. The legacy intersection of gender violence, of white supremacy, and of, you know, just keeping working class people down plays itself out when it comes to housing to this day. And so we see that locally in displacement of renters during the pandemic who are forced to double up. You know, renters who didn't own cars, were using public transportation, being forced into suburbs and parts of the city that don't have good access to transportation. That impacts how people are getting vaccines, right? If you live in a suburban area, your access to a hospital or to a pharmacy is pretty slim. And then, of course, we obviously know how that impacts people catching COVID. If you have multi-generational households where you have younger people working, you have elders who are retired or can't work, then we obviously know what the story is. And so we're literally seeing, you know, increased rates of COVID in Black and Latinx households in particular, and other working class households, in part due to the fact that you have a lot more people working out and about. As our service economies come back in New Orleans, we see an increase in rates popping up. And when you go Bourbon Street, you know, the people working inside largely in kitchens and whatnot tend to be Black folks. So, it's a major impact. And we also know that before pandemic, our own research via our eviction monitoring program that Jane Place offers, where we go into eviction court and monitor evictions, we know that 58% of all tenants who were evicted were Black women. We know 82% of all tenants were Black folks in general. despite the fact that as whole Black folks, we make up about 57% of the population in New Orleans. So the connections to race and housing are there, and that's one of the reasons why we need to just stop all evictions. We need comprehensive rental assistance, and we just need to stop all evictions until the pandemic ends.
Thanks, Frank. So I'm going to move into our second question here, which is thinking about solutions and the solutions that we actually need at the local, state, and federal level, which I think are likely to be different from the ones that we have been given so far. And I'm interested also in sort of strategies and tactics, and what have you seen make progress towards these goals? And before we start, we're going to do a second poll question here and just ask the audience what they want to see as solutions to our current housing crisis. So we can get that up, and you can, I believe you can pick one or two different here, but take a minute and do that real quick. And then Tara, why don't you start with the solutions and tactics question?
Sure, I appreciate the question. I think one of the ultimate curses of racial capitalism and the ways in which it's influenced our housing and land policies is that it limits our ability to dream of a different world, right? It's a crisis of imagination fundamentally that we're facing both at the local level and at the federal level when it comes to policy. So at the local level, it's interesting because we're having these conversations right now in Kansas City as our unhoused population is growing. It was already high. We had about 10,000 people living on the streets before the pandemic, and of course, several thousand more in hotels, motels, doubling up, living in their cars, other forms of homelessness. And those numbers have skyrocketed in the last several months. So local elected officials are really taking seriously the question of what we do, what are the solutions, right? Unfortunately, their imagination is limited, right? That sort of crisis of imagination is playing out at the local level. And what they're proposing is things like warming shelters, right? Places where people can go warm up if they're living on the streets, right? What they're proposing is hotels, temporary shelters. I don't have an issue with hotels as a general thought because it does allow people to quarantine safely during a time like this. Here's my issue. They're proposing hotels, they're buying out floors of hotels, and then they're removing the beds from the hotels and putting cots in instead, right? So basically, imagination is limited, and the design of the policies that exist today are extremely cruel, right? When you ask me and when you ask us at KC Tenants what the solution looks like at the local level right now, it's putting people in homes, right? There are vacant properties across the city. There are city-owned buildings that we could convert into permanent shelters, start there, and then wrap around services, leveraging some of the service infrastructure that we have here. Now, at the federal level, I've been part of this campaign to cancel rents and mortgages, because here's the thing, it doesn't matter how long we have an eviction moratorium. Ultimately, what we're doing with these moratorium policies, I should finish that sentence, sorry. It doesn't matter how long we have an eviction moratorium if we don't also cancel rents, mortgages, and rental debt. Because as long as we are extending these moratoriums at the national level, at the state level, at the local level, really what we're doing is kicking a can down the road. I'm starting to see eviction judgments in Jackson County, Missouri for $8,000, $10,000, $12,000. That is money that people will not ever be able to pay back. And in Missouri, your wages can be garnished if you get an eviction judgment for that amount of money, meaning people who are already in the worst financial period of their life, maybe are out of work and have been for months. If they ever get more stably employed again, their wages will be garnished until they pay down this $12,000 rental debt that they just got a judgment for. That is not just spelling financial ruin for that person, it's spelling financial ruin for that family. And that's intergenerational poverty in the making, right? So this kind of moment requires us to take seriously the fact that workers, tenants across the country did not create the conditions of this pandemic or the economic crisis that followed. And therefore, we should alleviate the burden that they have to pay rent, to pay a mortgage, and we should erase all of the rental debt that has accrued until this point. And then the way we get there is organizing. We can dig into that more later, but I'll let Frank or Sarah jump in on solutions as well.
Thank you, Tara. Yeah, Frank, I want to turn it over to you to maybe touch a little bit on tactics, especially because I know that the Renters' Rights Assembly and KC tenants have even sort of had some not quite coordinated, but similar actions.
Yeah, I think the tactics is a really interesting piece. We did an action without even communicating with each other on the same day back in July, in which we both shut down eviction court. Kansas City Tennis Union clearly still carrying the torch very boldly and amazingly, like just keeping it shut down in ways I've never seen as activists. So like it's really inspiring. I know like even yesterday we were talking about like what does the action like that look like doing that again. But ultimately, I think one of the things we're starting to think of, in addition to what Tara mentioned around canceling rent, creating a comprehensive eviction moratorium to at least, December 2021 at the very minimum. We also need to begin thinking about like legal representation. What does it look like, for tenants if we don't get like, a comprehensive eviction moratorium? We need right to counsel as a piece because, most of our tenants have, they don't really have access to have a lawyer come in court. We have a really amazing legal aid, Southeast Louisiana Legal Services, and there's just too many people. And so we need to like really equip like, our city with more tenant lawyers. Right to counsel is one of the tactics we're examining right now. But ultimately, it has to be about canceling rent, relief for small and medium-sized landlords. That's what it's got to be.
Thanks, Frank. And Sarah, you sit in a unique position in that you're working locally, but also part of this national organization. So I'm interested sort of to hear your perspective as well about sort of, what you see that we need on those multiple different levels.
Sure. I apologize. My internet is going in and out a little bit, so I turned my video off to make sure that you all can hear me. We have some really wild wind in DC that's like shaking my building right now, so I think that might be messing with the Wi-Fi a little bit. We absolutely need to cancel rent. There is no way that people are going to be able to pay down what they owe. It's just impossible, and you are straddling people with an impossible situation, or stranding people in an impossible situation. I also echo that a right to counsel in eviction proceedings is incredibly important. I think the eviction moratorium is a great example. It requires tenants to submit these declarations that most average people would not be able to fill out without the assistance of a lawyer, be able to go to court and present that declaration without the assistance of a lawyer. And so one of the things that we've done during this crisis is redistribute some of the funds that we've received to do eviction work as a national organization and recognize that local lawyers are doing it better. And so we have redistributed those funds to train pro bono lawyers on the ground who can assist tenants in eviction court, who can provide training on how to evaluate things like the CDC moratorium proceedings. And so it's, I think we're going to get into this a little bit later, but it's required us to kind of shift our approach. That being said, we also know that federal legislation is incredibly important. And now that we have a friendlier administration, I think we'll be taking a lot of steps to ensure that an eviction moratorium is extended, a comprehensive eviction moratorium extended, and we'll also be working with with Tara and other organizers to push for canceling rent.
Awesome. And I'm just going to take a little point of privilege here. Tara, would you mind jumping back on for a quick second and just doing just like a short explanation of sort of what the canceling rent and mortgages proposal actually looks like? Because I think people hear cancel rent first and they get really scared and they don't sort of, we don't always talk about the full picture of sort of how it protects a lot of different people.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I need to write a tweet on this and pin it to my profile, because whenever I do #cancel rent, inevitably in the comments, people are like, but what about the landlords? What about the property owners? What about the small owners who are trying to make it work? So here's how the bill works. We introduced this bill in April with Representative Ilhan Omar, and we're going to reintroduce it in just a couple weeks. So keep your eyes peeled for that. The first part is that it cancels rent and mortgage payments, right? That part is pretty self-explanatory. It just cancels the obligation obligation to pay rent or mortgage. The second part is that there is a relief fund that's then available to small property owners to apply and actually get relief because of lost rental income, right? But here's the critical difference between that relief fund and what exists now through rental assistance, is that that relief fund would come with conditions. And through those conditions, we would secure some really critical tenant protections that are not currently available at the federal level. To us, that distinction is huge, right? The rental assistance that Representative Waters has fought for is absolutely a critical harm reduction measure, but it needs to be amended to include this kind of conditioning so that landlords don't just accept this money from their tenant and then turn around the next month and evict them, right? Or that they don't turn around and increase the rent the next month or the next year, right? If we're gonna give a bailout to an industry, let's call it what it is, first of all. And secondly, let's tie some strings to it so that we can actually do multiple things at once and enshrine into federal law some of the protections that we've needed for so long, like good cause evictions and rent controls and stuff like that, right? So that's the second part. And then the last part of the bill that I'm really excited about, especially living in a place like Kansas City, Missouri, that was decimated by the 2008 speculation, or the 2008 crash, and then the real estate speculation that followed it. The last part of the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act is a component about an affordable housing acquisition fund that would basically give the federal government the first right to intervene and buy up distressed properties that are falling into foreclosure so that those corporate speculators who are already swooping around communities like mine can't swoop in and scoop them up before the rest of us, right? And then the federal government could turn those properties back over to the communities, and that would be the seedlings of a much larger social housing program where housing is controlled off of the private market and it's not available for speculation. I'm very optimistic about every piece of that. And then the piece that we're adding in the reintroduction is going to be a complete rental debt forgiveness piece, which we think is the minimum that Congress could do for renters who are now tens of thousands of dollars behind.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for laying that out, Tara. And I'll just say that I think, so the Fair Housing Action Center is signed on in support of that. But what it means when we don't take those big steps is that we spend so much time going back and trying correcting everything piece by piece. So as an example, we're running around right now trying to work with every local jurisdiction and the state who are receiving these rental assistance funds to try and get the most minimal of protections included in there so that when they are bailing landlords out, they're including some small bit of protections for renters in addition. But we shouldn't have to do that jurisdiction by jurisdiction. Similarly, the award that we gave to State Representative Ted James earlier for his work in supporting us trying to ensure that people's rent debt and evictions don't follow them around for 7 years after this pandemic and keep them out of homes, keep them out of jobs. That wouldn't be relevant if we canceled the debt. And if we just made sure that people could stay in their homes. There are much easier ways to go about this, but instead we've taken this sort of parceled piecemeal approach. So I want to move us on here to the next. Oh, do we have poll results from our latest poll? Thank you. Take a minute to look at those. I think, again, these are all important, but I'm glad we're also sort of talking about sort of these overarching pieces and how important they can be. So I want to talk now about sort of how this crisis and how COVID has maybe shifted your perspective, maybe made some things possible that you hadn't thought of before. And as we ask whether we need evictions, I also want to sort of bring in how this summer's Black Lives Matter activism started us questioning, maybe not for a lot of us, it wasn't a start, but brought into the sort of public discourse, this questioning of where we should be investing public resources. And so I want to sort of bring that in here too and think about those changes. And so Sarah, I'll start with you.
Sure.
So as I mentioned earlier, I think COVID has really logistically shown us the limitations of a national approach. And so we've shifted our resources to people on the ground in Minnesota, Louisiana, Baltimore, et cetera, to do direct eviction defense, to train attorneys. So I think that this has highlighted that there are some times where a national organization is not in the position to swoop in and solve everything. And that's also highlighted the importance of partnerships between attorneys and organizers on the ground, which I think Tara is going to talk a little bit more about. But that's been really, really important for us to be plugged into what issues people are actually facing. And finally, I think theoretically it's shifted our approach as well. I think even in the fair housing space, there are a lot of people who before COVID thought, okay, there are bad evictions and there are good evictions. There's evictions that shouldn't happen ever, and there's evictions that should happen under limited circumstances. But I think COVID, where home is the only place that is really safe from this virus, where people are out of tens of thousands of dollars, are out of money, out of no faults of their own, that we really have to think about whether evictions should be happening in the first place at all. They are extremely violent. They disrupt and upend families' lives, they upend the lives of children. And I think that we really have transformed our thinking into wondering whether this is something that should ever be happening at all, especially in a pandemic, but really ever. How do we justify telling someone that they don't deserve a place to live simply because they don't have money, or for whatever other reason that we can come up with? And so I think that COVID, while we need to cancel rent, while we need to guarantee that people can stay in their homes, I think COVID is going to have a lasting impact on the fair housing space and thinking about whether evictions are ever truly just and necessary.
Thank you. Yeah, and Frank, I'm going to come to you next, because I know we've talked a little bit about sort of this really creating space for us to think bigger. And so I'm interested to hear sort of how that's worked at the Renters' Rights Assembly.
Yeah, so I mean, the Renters' Rights Assembly, very similar. We are thinking about like what it means to end evictions, the fact that evictions are violence, as Sarah said. Ultimately, what does that mean? And a lot of what that means is community control land liberation, providing the funds for communities to be able to dictate collectively what they want to see happen in their neighborhoods. Ultimately, we know if people are in control of their own destiny, then they're safer. And so that's one of the things we have been talking about. It's like, what does land liberation look like within the tenants' rights movement? And so that's really important for us, is talking about like getting more access to land for people.
Awesome, thank you. And Tara, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of what Sarah and Frank shared as well. The way that I think about how COVID has shifted our demands, actions, and the story that we're telling, a lot of it begins with the quote from the brilliant Brazilian popular educator, Pablo Freire, who asks, what can we do today so that tomorrow we can do what we cannot do today? And something I've really sat with from the beginning of this pandemic in March is the politics of what we can do today have completely shifted around us, right? It's a check on the movement that we had actually never been demanding a complete end to evictions until March, right? And then we demanded it, and some of us within 24 hours won the demand, right? We got evictions shut down within 24 hours. So I think that's opened up, it's busted open the politics of possibility for us, right? And as you were saying, Maxwell, that includes not only what started in March through the pandemic and the economic crisis, but also the uprisings in the streets this summer. And what I've seen with our base locally in Kansas City and with the base of the Homes Guarantee campaign across the country is like a deep moment of politicization and radicalism as people sort of think about that politics of possibility and how it's shifting, but also people are deepening in their rage at the failures of these public systems that are supposed to protect us and instead have left so many of us behind. So in terms of shifts, like we've seen a shift in our demands towards more radical demands and demands that are more systemic, like cancel rent, like a full end to evictions, right? We've seen a shift in the actions that our people are willing to take. We've got leaders in the KC Tenants base who have a lot of difficulty and experience with the carceral state, and yet yet are still running up on court doors and chaining themselves to those doors, because that's the action they feel they need to take, not only for themselves, but for their community as well, right? And then we've had a shift in the story that we're telling. To Frank's point and Sarah's, we are saying every single day, especially this month, which we've declared Zero Eviction January, we're saying every eviction is an act of violence. And we're not qualifying that by saying during a pandemic. We're saying every eviction is an act of violence. And we're starting to question why we have ever allowed for evictions in this country. Because Frank's been in eviction court, I've been in eviction court. That's like debt collection, right? There's no justice in that system. And it's a system that strips someone of their home to protect someone else's property and profit. That's not okay, and we shouldn't allow it in the richest country in the history of the world. So the final thing that I'll say is that it's kind of lit a fire under all of us who were already aligned around this national platform for a homes guarantee, right? We actually need to radically transform how we consider housing from commodity to guaranteed public good and human right. And this vision we put out in 2019, but to channel Frank's energy, it needs to be bigger, it needs to be bolder. My theme word for the year is more. Give the people more. The people deserve more. It's not a radical thing. Give the people more.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Tara. I think this is one of the ways that we've started sort of reframing our conversation here is trying to make clear that eviction is often talked about as a moral failing, rather than as the inevitable result of the way we've structured our housing system. You can just look at the basic data, which is that if you look at, how much a renter has to make in order to afford an apartment in any city in the country, and it never matches up with sort of the typical renter salary. It certainly doesn't match up with minimum wage. So to pretend that this is somehow a failing of renters when the system is set up against them, it doesn't make any sense. And it's something that I think I'm excited that we're all starting to sort of acknowledge and speak that out and sort of move with that. So I'm gonna come to our last question here before we take some from the audience. So again, just a reminder, feel free to put questions in the Q&A box if you have them, and we'll take some at the end. The last piece we want to touch on is how can individual people help? How can our audience members help? And as we do that, we're also going to just reprise our first poll, just now that we've had this conversation. You've had some more time to think about it. Feel free to take a minute to answer that. And then, Sarah, I'll start with you about sort of how would you advise people to get involved? And also for our panelists, feel free to drop any sort of actions or resources into the chat box for all panelists as you're talking or before you speak, so that people can go, if there are easy actions people can take, let's do it.
Sure. So I think the first thing is people really need money, and they need money for rent. People are picking and choosing between paying their rent, paying medical bills, buying things for their kids. And so one of the things that I've been doing, even outside of my capacity as a housing lawyer, has just been redistributing funds. I've been raising funds and redistributing them. I've been donating to mutual aid funds. I've been straight up responding to people's requests for Venmos that I see on Twitter. And because people just really need money and there's nowhere for people to get it. Jobs are closed. We have no idea when they'll be open or if they'll be open in a safe way. So the first thing I would say is if you have extra funds to redistribute, give them out, help people. I also would echo what Representative Waters said. You need to keep housing on the radar of people. I don't understand necessarily how politicians can ignore the issue of housing when it's so foundational to access to just about everything else for someone's life. And so keeping it on the radar, writing to your representatives, blowing up their phone lines, making sure they
Sarah, we might be losing you a little bit from the...
Hope that our development team is not on here, but a lot of... I'll turn the video off. Is that better? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's gonna work better. Thank you.
I was gonna say, I hope that our development team is not listening to me right now, but a lot of national organizations got a lot of happening.
And we're still having a little trouble. So Sarah, I'm going to pause for a second and come to Frank real quick, and then, oops.
Direct actions that are. Did I cut out?
Yeah, sorry, you're cutting out a little bit. I'm gonna move on, and then we'll come back to you at the end in hopes that maybe things have stabilized a little bit, if that's okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. So Frank, why don't you jump in here about sort of what actions people can take, what can individuals do?
Yes, I echo a lot of the things Sarah said. I think involving mutual aid donating, especially to our undocumented brothers and sisters, who, especially if you're in the deep South, because we know that our states aren't prime funds at all compared to places like California and New York for people. In the context of the Renter Strike Assembly in Jane Place, a literal way she can get involved is helping out with our Renter Strikes hotline, by canvassing, by joining us, joining our campaigns, helping us to plan our campaigns. We really need to build connections across the city and region. And the way that we get the relief we need in Baton Rouge is by working together, joining together. So definitely I encourage people to get involved. You can go to our Facebook page, New Orleans Renter Strikes Assembly. If you're interested in land liberation, get in contact with the Jane Place Neighborhood Sustainability Initiative. It sounds like corny and hokey, but really like this is time to walk with hope and not fear, and to believe that we can do whatever we want. What Tara said about like challenging the ideal that eviction should occur is like where we need to be at. Like I'm on this high, like evictions don't need to occur. They're like unholy beasts. If I go with that in my heart, they won't occur in the future. If we do this collectively together, we'll get the results we want for the people.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate that sort of hopeful message. And Tara, why don't you close us out?
Sure, thank you so much. Frank, I love that, and I felt that in my body, so thank you for some wise words to take me through my day. I mean, I think the main thing that I have to add beyond mutual aid, Casey Tenants has done a hotline, but the main thing I have to add is like taking action with your body and like taking to the streets with comrades in your community, right? Organizing the neighbors in your building, taking direct action whenever and if ever it's necessary. I won't name names, but I recently had a conversation with a member of Congress who was not present today, but a member of Congress who said to me, we have to be careful about power because when we use power, we lose power. And I was like, sir, you and I have a completely different analysis of power, because this whole month, Casey Tenants has been taking escalated direct action for now 28 days in January, shutting down over 717 evictions. We're about to add over 150 evictions shut down based on today's actions. We have a 95% success rate for ending evictions this month. And my key lesson from this month of action is that when you use power, you build power. Using power builds power, right? So I think about this moment as an incredible moment of hope and opportunity. The base building potential is limitless, as so many people have been politicized by the last 10 months, by the pandemic, by the uprisings in the streets. This is our opportunity to seize, demand, and win the world that we deserve. And so I have to channel that in my heart. And obviously I'm feeling that coming from an action just this morning, and I'm going to have to hop off in a second because we're about to go shut down evictions once more. So the last thing that I want to say is, like, if you have any capacity to join with the Renters' Rights Assembly, to join with Casey Tenants, to join the fight for a homes guarantee, or to join with any kind of worker or tenant organizing across the country, I really encourage you to do that and figure out how you can contribute to the movement.
Thank you, Tara, and good luck today. And Sarah, do you want? Let's try one more time and see if there's anything else you wanted to add in on your answer.
I'm not sure what everybody heard and what we didn't hear, but I would just join direct actions, donate to people if you have the money to do that, and help them out, and make sure that anybody with any power to do anything about housing knows that housing is an issue and you're not going away until they fix our system.
Thank you. And so now I'm just going to take a few questions from our Q&A. And big thanks to Tara, who had to jump off. We so appreciate her time, and we appreciate her activism and what she's going to do. So I'm going to take the first one real quick, which is one that I actually heard at the legislature the other day. I'm prepared to take occasionally here, which is, what should happen to tenants that the pandemic had no effect upon, but just decided not to pay their rent? And I'll say that I think that this is something that we've heard from some landlord advocates before, landlord lobbyists in particular. And I think I would just caution folks against assuming that they understand people's circumstances. You know, we had one of our legal aid lawyers was discussing this, and she was talking about someone who she didn't lose her job, but she can't actually afford her rent just on her job. And because, like we talked about, most people don't make enough to actually afford rent, or a lot of renters don't make a lot to actually afford rent. She relied on sort of regular gifts and support from a family member, and that family member did lose a job. And so now, even though she can't show proof that she lost work, or she is still behind on rent. And so I think it's important that we sort of make sure that we're not making those assumptions, and understanding sort of that a lot of people are in a really rough situation right now. But if Frank or Sarah, if you had any other quick answers to that, feel free to jump in.
I feel like you did a really good job. I just have not seen this mythical tenant that refuses to pay their rent just because it's a pandemic. And so people like stability.
Yeah, it's not.
I would say the same thing. I think even if this person does exist, and the majority of people that we're seeing, all the people that I've seen talk about this issue are not those people. But even if this magical person does exist, that's not a justification for making sure that people who are really out of work, or who really cannot afford their rent, or who deserve homes, don't deserve policies that help them, even if there are a magical few number of people who might just be not paying their rent. The majority of people need to be.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah and Frank. Frank, I'm gonna come to you with this next one. I see that you maybe are already typing an answer, but I'm gonna let you answer live because I think it might apply to more than just the person who asked it here. Who says, I live in a building of 12 units in New Orleans. How can I work together? Oops, that just disappeared. 1 second here. How can I work together with a few of my neighbors to ensure housing safety if my landlord tries to evict? What kind of actions can we take?
Yes, sorry. Sorry, typing the response. I love multi-family unit buildings when there are tenants who are interested in throwing down, because it's a lot easier to organize folks and work with folks in multi-family unit buildings. So just message us. We would love to work with you. We would love for you to join us. We would love to educate you about what's going on, about your rights. So yeah, hit us up, 504-517-5470. Texting prefer. But yeah, love to join up. I don't know if the individual's still on, but hopefully they are.
Awesome. And then our last question is about people who are facing foreclosure and then maybe facing eviction because of that foreclosure, or may have tenants who, you know, maybe it's a double who are facing eviction because of that foreclosure. That's something that either of you all have seen in your work. And sort of what kind of education can we provide for people in that situation?
There's a couple different organizations that are doing work that can educate people about their rights. This is about like the actual mortgage holder or the tenant. Sorry.
I think we're talking about the mortgage holder. It sounds like that's what the question is about, but I'd feel free to answer for both.
Yeah, for the mortgage holder, definitely contact organizations locally if you're in New Orleans, Neighborhood Housing Services of New Orleans. They can help guide you in options. For tenants, there is several different laws to protect tenants going through foreclosure. I can't remember the specific names, but if you contact Southeast Louisiana Legal Services, they can educate you more about that. I know there are protection certificates who live in buildings, protect them from eviction up to 90 days. So definitely give them a call. I do not have their contact info, but I can get it and post in the chat.
I should also add that the Louisiana Fair Housing Action Center has a foreclosure prevention specialist on staff. So if you know someone who's in that position, please have them call us if they're in the state of Louisiana. That's something that we specialize in and can certainly provide some assistance. So that's all the questions we have. So thank you all for participating in our polls by asking questions. And thank you especially to our panelists for making time today, for sharing all of your brilliance with us. We're so excited that we get to work with y'all. And it was really, I don't think any of us are excited about doing all of this distancing and not being close to each other, and all of the mess that comes with COVID. But it has been wonderful to have people from across the country join us and share expertise this year. And we really, really deeply appreciate it and are excited to work with you. So with that, I will close our panel and just remind everyone to get involved with your local tenants union. And I'm going to turn this back over to Kashana to close.
Thanks, Maxwell, and thanks to all of our panelists for that very energizing and inspiring conversation. As we close today, I would like to thank Carol Fife. I'd like to also thank Dance for Social Change, of course, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Representatives Ted James and Mandy Landry. Also want to thank our panelists, Frank Southall, Sarah Carthen Watson, and Tara Raghavir, as well as all of you for attending today. I would like to remind you to please fill out your evaluation and survey via the link in the chat or immediately upon leaving the webinar that will pop up for you. Again, want to ask that you consider becoming a recurring donor to LAFAC in any amount to sustain our work and allow us to respond quickly in this very unpredictable climate. If you missed any of the 3 sessions, make sure to review the recordings at fitforaking.org. And again, we will share that link in the chat. You can also see all of the sessions and share them on our Facebook page. We would love for you to get more involved in our work through whichever opportunity works best for you, whether that's working with us to offer fair housing training within your staff or to your community, to your members, clients, or students, making referrals, providing input on policies that impact your communities, alerting us if you see any housing discrimination, or becoming a mystery shopper. You can read more about our work at lafairhousing.org. And please, again, make sure that you take the time to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. We thank you again for your time and for sharing this experience with us. Thank you.